The gates opened before London had fully woken up. Not the grand front entrance people photograph with their flags and phones. Not the kind of arrival meant for cameras. This was quieter than that. Colder too. A dark SUV moved through the rear entrance of Clarence House just after dawn, and for a few strange minutes, even the people trained to expect the unexpected looked caught off guard. Inside that car, according to palace whispers and reports that later spread through royal circles, was Prince Harry. No Meghan Markle. No official notice. No smiling wave. No neat little statement released to the press. Just Harry, back in Britain, moving through the kind of silence that usually means something is already wrong. That alone would have been enough to get people talking. Harry's movements had not been simple for years. Every visit to the United Kingdom had become a global event before he even landed. Security teams knew. The press knew. The public knew. There was always a build-up, always noise, always opinion. But this time, there was none of that. And that was exactly what made it feel bigger. Prince Harry did not return like a royal on duty. He returned like a son who did not want the world to know he was there. That changes the feeling of the whole story. Because once you see it that way, everything around that morning starts to look different. The guards scrambling behind closed doors. Advisors suddenly being called in. Doors opening and shutting softly through those old rooms. The strange stillness. The sense that something had arrived before anyone was ready for it. On that same morning, King Charles was not preparing for ceremony. He was in private, going through estate papers linked to Queen Elizabeth II. By then, these documents should have been routine. Sad, yes. Heavy, of course. But still routine. The kind of royal paperwork done far from cameras, with folders open neatly on polished desks, lawyers sitting straight-backed, and every page handled like it matters. Because in that world, every page does matter. Most of those documents were said to be predictable. Private property. Heirlooms. Matters already long understood within the family. Balmoral. Sandringham. Jewelry. Personal arrangements. Nothing that should have shaken the room. Then one envelope appeared. It was thinner than the others. Easy to miss, really. But the date on it stood out. March 2022. Only months before the Queen's death. That is the kind of detail palace people notice. And once it was opened, the room, if the accounts are true, changed completely. The document inside was handwritten. Not rough notes. Not a messy draft. A finished instruction. Deliberate. Calm. Clear enough that nobody in the room could pretend they were misunderstanding it. It mentioned Prince Harry directly. Not vaguely. Not emotionally. Directly. And from that moment, what had begun as a private review of Queen Elizabeth's estate started to feel like the reopening of a family wound nobody had truly survived. People who follow the royal family know this much already. Grief inside that family is never just grief. It comes mixed with duty, history, pride, silence, and old pain that has had years to harden. A simple legal clause does not stay simple for long when it lands between a father and a son already separated by oceans, interviews, books, anger, and years of public damage. That is why this story spread so fast once the first whispers escaped the walls. What many people don't know is that the most explosive royal stories often begin in the least dramatic way possible. A closed room. A quiet voice. A page turned at the wrong moment. No shouting. No scene. Just one sentence read in silence, and suddenly everyone understands that the past is not finished yet. And if that was already happening inside Clarence House, Harry's presence made it worse. Or maybe more honest. Because if the reports are right, Harry had not shown up to posture. He had not flown in to perform outrage. He had not landed with cameras waiting outside so the world could watch another episode in the royal war. He came quietly. That matters. Especially in a family where public moves are often planned weeks in advance. It suggested urgency. It suggested fear. It suggested that whatever had been discovered in those papers might not have stayed buried much longer anyway. There is another detail that keeps coming up in these accounts, and it is hard to ignore. Harry came alone. Meghan Markle remained in California. That absence spoke almost as loudly as his arrival. Usually, when the Sussexes made a major public move, people watched them as a pair. Supporters and critics both treated them like a united front. But on this occasion, the image was different. Harry was not moving like part of a campaign. He was moving like someone pulled by something older than strategy. Family. That word has followed this story from the beginning, but rarely in a warm way. Family as pressure. Family as duty. Family as control. Family as public spectacle. Yet on this morning, according to the shape of what unfolded, family seemed to mean something quieter and more painful than all of that. A father in one room. A son at the gate. A dead mother's final decision sitting open on a desk between them. That is not ordinary palace business. That is the kind of image people remember. And still, even then, nobody outside knew the full shape of it. Not yet. Because the first whispers were only about the meeting itself. Harry had come. Charles had seen him. Something in the Queen's papers had raised alarm. That was the beginning of the gossip. But there was more underneath it. Much more. The kind of detail that makes a royal story stop feeling like a headline and start feeling like a reckoning. According to accounts from people close to these circles, the handwritten clause was not mainly about money. Yes, inheritance was part of it. But the real power of the document lay elsewhere. It carried conditions. Expectations. A structure that seemed designed not only to provide for Harry, but to force a decision that nobody had wanted to make out loud. That is what made the room go cold. Not the value of anything. The intent. Queen Elizabeth, even in her final months, may have been planning one last move to keep Prince Harry tied to Britain, tied to the Commonwealth, and tied to King Charles whether either man was ready or not. And if that is true, then that dawn meeting was never just a secret visit. It was the first tremor before a deeper shake. Because now the question was no longer whether the family had broken. The question was whether the Queen had left behind a way to force them to face it. To understand why that private meeting felt so loaded, you have to go back long before the envelope. Back before California. Before the interviews. Before memoirs, official statements, and the endless debate over who betrayed whom first. You have to remember who Prince Harry used to be inside that family. For years, Harry was seen as the easier prince to read. Prince William looked built for the crown from the start, steady, careful, already carrying the shape of the future. Harry was different. Warmer in public. Looser. Sometimes funny. Sometimes reckless. Often the one who made royal life seem less stiff and less rehearsed. He brought mischief into rooms made of duty. And Queen Elizabeth seemed to understand that part of him. People who watched the family closely often spoke about the ease between Harry and his grandmother. He could make her laugh. That mattered more than it sounds. In a world where everyone watched their words, Harry could still break the tension. He could still remind people there was a family inside the institution, not just roles. That is why the break hit so hard. When Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from royal duties in 2020, the shock was not only about the decision. It was about how suddenly the ground shifted beneath everyone. Royal households depend on order, rank, timing, control. The Sussex exit felt like a public crack running straight through all of that. And once the crack appeared, it widened fast. There was the move abroad. Then the Oprah interview. Then the claims of pain, neglect, and racism around the institution. Then the long list of moments that made palace insiders feel not merely challenged, but exposed. The family was no longer dealing with private upset. The private upset had become global content. That changed everything. By the time Prince Harry began speaking openly against the institution, the problem was no longer one family argument. It had become a war over truth itself. Each side seemed to have its own version. Harry's version was about isolation, silence, and being unprotected when it mattered most. Meghan's version added another layer. A woman entering the royal machine and finding not warmth, but pressure, suspicion, and collapse. Their supporters saw courage in that. Their critics saw calculation. Either way, the damage was real. Then came the memoir. And that, for many royal watchers, was the moment old hurt hardened into something far harder to undo. Because memoirs are not just confessions. They are records. Once things are written, named, and sold around the world, families cannot easily go back to pretending a wound is private. Accounts from journalists and insiders revealed that after that stage, trust inside the royal circle was said to be almost gone. Not fully dead, perhaps, but fragile enough that every new move felt dangerous. Every appearance carried a question. Every silence carried one too. And King Charles was not facing this only as a father. He was now the monarch. That matters more than most people realize. A father can bend. A king must think about precedent, symbolism, duty, and the message every decision sends through the whole structure. The crown does not let a person feel only one thing at a time. It forces layers. Even grief becomes political. Even forgiveness can look strategic. So when people ask why things seem so cold, that is part of the answer. The other part is simpler and sadder. Pain, repeated often enough, starts turning into habit. And that is what seemed to happen between father and son. Disappointment led to distance. Distance led to public explanation. Public explanation led to deeper hurt. Before long, even small gestures became difficult because every move was being watched, judged, and interpreted by millions of strangers. Then Queen Elizabeth died. That should have been a moment of pure mourning. Instead, it landed inside a family already cracked in too many places. Harry came back for the funeral, of course, and the images from that period carried their own sadness. The old settings were still there. The uniforms. The processions. The heavy doors and old stone and history pressing down on everyone. But the family itself no longer looked like a unit moving through grief together. It looked careful. Measured. As if everyone feared one wrong word would escape and become tomorrow's headline. What many don't know is that this is often how royal trouble works. The real damage is not always in the public explosion. It is in the long quiet after. The missed calls. The stilted meetings. The formal arrangements replacing natural closeness. The way people begin speaking through aides because direct conversation feels too raw. That is why the idea of Queen Elizabeth leaving behind a private clause feels believable to so many people, even before anyone asks whether every detail can be proven. It fits her image. Not loud. Not theatrical. Strategic. Timed. Controlled. A move made in silence, then revealed only when it would matter most. Because if there was one thing Elizabeth understood, it was timing. She had ruled through family scandals before. She knew that emotions burn hot in the first days, then cool into something people can manage. She knew that some truths, if revealed too early, are rejected on sight. Revealed later, they land differently. So if she truly created a condition tied to Harry's future, it would make sense that she buried it inside legal order rather than public sentiment. No speech. No drama. Just paper. And paper, in royal life, can be more powerful than emotion. By the time reports began circulating about that hidden clause, people were already asking another question too. Where did Meghan Markle stand in all of this? Because although Harry may have arrived alone, nobody believed Meghan was irrelevant to what came next. For years, she had been treated by critics as the force pulling Harry away from home, and by supporters as the woman who helped him finally see the cost of staying. That tension stayed alive. Some close to the couple described Meghan as deeply angry whenever Harry's royal identity was publicly diminished. Not because of vanity alone, but because those moves seemed to her like moral judgment dressed up as procedure. To her critics, that sounded convenient. To those sympathetic to her, it sounded understandable. Either way, there was pressure from both directions. Move forward, build a life beyond the palace, and stop looking back. Or turn around, face the family, and ask whether anything still remained to be saved. That is where the pattern becomes painful. Because once Harry's royal titles, role, and public image began falling away piece by piece, he may have been forced to face a question far bigger than press strategy. Who was he without the thing he had spent his whole life being? A prince is not just a title. In Harry's case, it was the frame around his entire identity. Army service, public work, the Invictus Games, his charity image, even his rebellion against royal life, all of it still sat inside that original frame. Take it away, and what remains? That is not a question a legal team can answer. That is a human crisis. And according to the whispers that followed, it may have pushed Harry towards something he had resisted for a very long time. Not a comeback. Not revenge. Home. On that particular occasion, the real shock was not only what Queen Elizabeth may have written. It was what that writing demanded from the living. According to accounts that spread through royal circles, the clause tied Prince Harry's inheritance to continued connection with Britain and the Commonwealth. Not a full return to royal duty. Not a public apology. Not a dramatic surrender. Something more subtle than that, and maybe more powerful. Presence. The reports said Harry's access to the full inheritance depended on staying meaningfully linked to the world his grandmother had served all her life. Time spent in Britain. Time in Commonwealth nations. Work connected to charity and community. A framework that sounded, on paper, almost gentle. But inside this family, nothing about it was gentle. Because a condition like that does two things at once. It offers a door. And it reminds you that you left. If the clause was real, Queen Elizabeth was not only giving Prince Harry money. She was giving King Charles and Prince Harry no choice but to deal with each other. That is what made it feel so dangerous. A straight gift could have passed quietly. A simple inheritance would have raised some eyebrows, yes, but not much more. This was different. This carried design. It almost seemed to speak in the Queen's voice: freedom, yes, but not disappearance. Independence, yes, but not total severing. She was drawing a line between leaving royal duty and leaving the family itself. And that line, for years, had been the hardest one of all. The room where Charles read the clause must have felt smaller with every sentence. You can almost see it, legal advisors sitting still, someone clearing their throat but deciding not to speak, a clock ticking too loudly because nobody else is making a sound. Charles reading once, then again, because sometimes the mind refuses to accept what the eyes have already confirmed. There is something deeply human about that image. Not the king. The son. A son realizing that even after death, his mother had found one last way to place a decision in front of him. And not just any decision. A decision wrapped around the one relationship already sore enough to split under pressure. People often assume royal conflict is all cold strategy. Sometimes it is. But this story, if the accounts are even half right, carried something messier than strategy. It carried longing, pride, fear, and the humiliating fact that power cannot fix a broken bond when both people are too hurt to speak normally. So what happened next? Not the public headlines. Those came later. The private movement. Reports suggested Harry did not launch into attack mode. That is one of the strangest and most telling details in the whole story. After years in which every royal rupture seemed to turn almost instantly into commentary, this time there was restraint. No immediate interview. No rolling media war. No dramatic appearance explaining his side before the ink dried. Instead, according to several versions of the story, Harry asked for a pause. That small move says a lot. It suggests he understood that this was not one more fight to be won in public. It suggests he felt the weight of what had been placed in front of him. Most of all, it suggests he may have seen the clause for what it really was, not only a legal arrangement, but his grandmother's last attempt to keep him from drifting too far to find his way back. And if Harry saw that, then Meghan had to see it too. Which is where the tension likely deepened. Because while Harry may have felt pulled backward by family, memory, and identity, Meghan's future had long been imagined in a different direction. Forward. Independent. Past the palace. Past the need for their old roles. Past the idea that healing required returning to the place that had hurt them. That difference matters. Not because it proves one was right and the other wrong, but because it reveals the kind of conflict no camera ever catches. Not the loud fight. The quiet disagreement at home. One person feeling the pull of unfinished family grief. The other seeing another trap dressed up as sentiment. Both reactions make sense. That is what makes the story so watchable. Because it is not only about monarchy. It is about a kind of pain many families understand, even without palaces. The parent who will not say what they really feel. The child who leaves but never fully stops wanting to belong. The partner who sees the damage more clearly than the person born inside it. The grandparent who tries, maybe too late, to stop the whole thing from hardening forever. And then there were the children. Another reported part of the clause made the matter even more emotional. A separate amount was said to have been set aside for Archie and Lilibet, intended for their education and upbringing, but with strong hope that they would not grow up as strangers to Britain. Not only to the country, to the family, to the history. That detail feels very Queen Elizabeth. Not sentimental in public, but privately aware of legacy, continuity, and the ache of distance. She had spent 70 years thinking in generations. She would not have seen grandchildren and great-grandchildren as separate from the larger story of the House of Windsor. If she believed those ties were slipping, she may well have tried to knot them again in the only way still available to her. With law. With timing. With quiet force. The clause may have looked like inheritance on the surface, but underneath it was really about belonging. That is why it had such power. Once those details began circulating, palace insiders were said to be deeply uneasy. Not because the Queen had acted outside the law. Quite the opposite. Reports claimed the provision had been carefully prepared, properly witnessed, and made hard to challenge. The unease came from what the clause threatened to expose, that the late Queen had seen the family divide more clearly than those around her wanted to admit. And she did not trust time alone to fix it. That is a brutal thing to realize after someone is gone. It means she worried. It means she planned around that worry. It means she knew the next king might one day need help facing his own son. So while the world argued in headlines about titles, blame, image, and loyalty, the deeper crisis sat elsewhere. It sat in one impossible question. What was Charles supposed to do now? Ignore the spirit of his mother's final wish and risk looking cold, even to himself? Or honor it and reopen a relationship that had already cost him years of pain, public embarrassment, and political trouble? There was no clean option. That is the part gossip often misses. People love royal drama because it looks grand and distant. But at its core, this one seems painfully ordinary. A parent with power but no peace. A son with freedom but no center. A dead matriarch still trying to hold both ends of the rope. And by then, one more truth was beginning to show itself. The clause had not created the crisis. It had exposed it. By the time the full shape of the story started to form, one thing had become hard to ignore. This was never just about who got what. It was about what Queen Elizabeth believed could still be repaired. Accounts from royal watchers, journalists, and people familiar with palace habits all point toward the same deeper reading. If she truly left such a clause behind, she was not punishing Harry. She was not rewarding rebellion either. She was doing what she had done for most of her life, trying to steady a structure that was beginning to drift apart. But this time, the structure was her own family. That is what gives the whole story its weight. The public usually saw Elizabeth as composed almost to the point of mystery. The steady face. The careful words. The woman who never seemed to give too much away. Yet people close to the institution have long said that behind that public discipline was someone who understood family breakage very well. She had lived through divorce, scandal, grief, resentment, and the terrible cost of silence. She knew how damage settles into a family and stays there for years. So if she acted in the final stretch of her life, she likely acted with full awareness of what she was doing. Not as a queen alone. As a mother. As a grandmother. As the one person all sides still had reason to listen to. Her reported private letter to King Charles makes that feeling even sharper. If the accounts are accurate, it did not read like an order. It read like a final appeal. Harry was still her grandson. Archie and Lilibet were still her great-grandchildren. Whatever had happened, whatever had been said in interviews, whatever bitterness had grown in public, she was not prepared to leave the world accepting total separation as final. That is heartbreaking in a very quiet way. Because it suggests regret. It suggests she may have felt time running out before the family had found its way back to itself. And maybe that is why the clause carried conditions instead of comfort. Because by then, comfort was not enough. Hope alone was not enough. The Queen may have believed that if healing was ever going to happen, it needed a frame. Something practical. Something that required movement. Something that made distance harder to maintain forever. Not a miracle. A pathway. Queen Elizabeth's last reported move was not about forcing love. It was about making estrangement harder to choose. That is a very different thing. It also explains why the story continues to pull people in. Not because people only enjoy royal scandal, though clearly many do. It stays gripping because it touches something older and more familiar than monarchy. The fear that families can drift so far apart they start acting like strangers. The hope that one person, even late, might still leave behind a bridge. Public reaction, naturally, would never be simple. Some would see any condition placed on Harry as manipulative. Others would call it wise. Some would argue Charles had every reason to protect the monarchy first. Others would say a father only gets so many chances to repair things with a son. Meghan's supporters would read the whole matter through the years of hostility she says she faced. Meghan's critics would see another example of Harry being pulled between two worlds. And all of them, in their own way, would be responding to the same emotional truth: this family has never merely lived its pain. It has displayed it. That is what makes every move feel larger than life. A private hurt becomes national debate. A family disagreement becomes a moral argument for millions of strangers. A handwritten note in a dead queen's papers becomes a story about duty, love, power, identity, and whether anyone can go home after publicly burning the path behind them. What happened after that secret meeting may never be fully known. That is the honest part. Royal families survive on controlled silence. Important conversations vanish behind walls built long before television existed. There may have been soft words. There may have been painful ones. There may have been more hesitation than progress. Real reconciliation, if it ever comes, is rarely dramatic. It is usually awkward, uneven, and full of moments nobody would ever call cinematic. Maybe that is why the story feels real. Not because every whispered detail can be pinned down with perfect certainty, but because the emotional logic is painfully believable. Harry, after years of fighting the institution, might still miss his father. Charles, after years of public pain, might still feel the pull of his son. Meghan might still see danger where others see opportunity. And Elizabeth, even at the end, might still refuse to believe the break had to be permanent. That is not fantasy. That is family. And in some ways, the biggest shock in this entire story is not the money, the clauses, the titles, or the secrecy. It is the possibility that beneath all the formal language, all the protocol, all the old wounds and public battles, the late Queen may have been trying to say one simple thing. Do not let this end here. If Charles honors the spirit of that message, the future may still hold a kind of peace, not perfect, not easy, but real enough to matter. Harry could remain independent and still reconnect. Archie and Lilibet could know Britain without being trapped by it. Meghan and the wider family might never become close, but open hostility could soften into distance that no longer bleeds. That would not be a fairy tale. It would be something rarer. A damaged family choosing not to damage itself forever. But if the effort fails, then the clause becomes something else entirely. Not a bridge. A mirror. Proof that even the most careful final wish cannot heal people who are too wounded, too proud, or too tired to cross the space between them. And maybe that is the truest ending of all. Because stories like this are never really about crowns. They are about what people do when love and hurt live in the same room for too long. They are about the burden of being seen by the whole world while still carrying private grief like everyone else. They are about mothers who worry, sons who pull away, fathers who freeze, and the terrible cost of waiting too long to say the thing that matters. In the end, the most powerful image is still the first one. A quiet morning. A rear gate opening. Prince Harry stepping out of a dark car while King Charles sits inside with Queen Elizabeth's final words on his desk. No cameras. No speeches. Just history, grief, and one family standing at the edge of another decision. And sometimes that is where the deepest royal stories really begin.